So we're going to let Alan Amabisca take it from here. Alan is on the board of Save Helvetia and Helvetia Community Association. Alan's going to give us a overview of their journey and challenges in a similar kind of vein. So, Alan, thanks again for joining us, and tell us all about it.
Thank you, John, for inviting me. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here. Let me give you just a background. How did I get into this? Basically, back in the early 1990s, I was working with the elementary school where my two daughters were going. And I just happened to be walking down the hallway one day when one of the ladies came up to me and said, "We hear you know something about finance." I balanced my checkbook. And I said, what do you need? And they said, well, we have a little, wives of a school, not even a school board function. It was a community club where the women of the area put together a little pie sale once a year to help give money to the schools. And they raised somewhere in the vicinity of $300. But they knew that they needed more. So someone had thought, maybe we could do a nonprofit, but no one knew how to do it or wanted to do that. So someone asked me, could you help us develop and start a nonprofit? I had absolutely no knowledge of how to do a nonprofit. But I said, well, okay, sure, let me try. I'll try to put together some information. So I just went and got an IRS manual on how to put together a nonprofit. I put the nonprofit together. And due to my work, where I worked in finance, I knew how to talk to people, so I would be able to talk. I just called up the IRS agents in San Francisco and said, here's what I'm trying to do. I filled the form out to this level, but I can't answer the next question. Can you help me? I didn't act professional. I just thought, well, I'll just act like I'm a member of this local community. And they helped me put together a nonprofit. They told me what to fill out, what not to say, what to say on each line. And I put together the nonprofit. And I handed it back to the little club and said, here's your nonprofit, here's how you run it, here's what you need to do, which was very simple, outlined, and I was done. The people involved with the nonprofit, they now put together their bake sales, they started to grow, they got more people in. 2 years later, remember, they started at $300. 2 years later, $30,000. And they had the infrastructure to handle it. They literally were able to bring in OMSI. They went to OMSI, said, you have courses, seminars, we'd like you to just bring them to the school. And the teachers worked with OMSI, coordinated what was going on, and that's what happened. And I would get updates, because I went back to work. I had nothing to do with the club. I would get updates from my children saying, Dad, you know what happened today? They had eagles and owls flying in the gym. Okay, well, that sounds pretty nice. They're doing a great job. Fast forward a few more years, someone came to me and said, we're trying to form a nonprofit. We need some guidance. Okay, I'm an expert. I know I did one. So I gave them advice on how to fill it out and what to do, and they went and did it. And that became the Save Helvetia organization. I, in the meantime, had my career working along, and I had heard that there was groups getting together. So there's no magic here. It's just an individual. You have the expertise. Each of you have knowledge, expertise. But when you work together, you can put together something very powerful. So let me give you a description of what happened out in Helvetia. That's the area in north part of Washington County, north of Highway 26. The Helvetia community, they have a long tradition of fighting for the land. Nearly 100 years ago, a farmer became very upset with the railroad, which was taking land, being given land arbitrarily in blocks across the county. That farmer said, "That's not right, I don't want to lose this land." And he began to fight and fund it by himself, and actually went to the state Supreme Court and won, stopping the land grab by the railroad. That's how he perceived it. But again, he preserved the land. Next slide, please. In the 1990s, early 1990s, and up through the 2000s, the citizens of Helvetia were faced with multiple challenges at different times. And they had to fight to preserve the land. They had to fight against the state, metro, and local governments over various issues. They had to prevent the siting, for example, of 2 state prisons, a men's prison and a women's prison, at different points in time. They had to fight Metro over a major garbage transfer site to be built in the middle of Helvetia. They also then had to fight the local governments over what was called an animal waste dump. It turns out, who knew, right, that sheep are imported from Australia into the United States, and they, at that time, were coming through Portland. And during transit, some of the animals would die, and they needed a place to dump the animals. Who realized that there were 10,000 sheep carcasses that needed to be buried on prime agricultural land? Well, the community citizens fought. They just banded together and tried to fight this, and were able to deflect, push away those attacks on that prime farmland. And it is indeed prime farmland. Helvetia area has some of the most valuable farmland in the world. The type of soils there are incredibly productive. You can grow over 100 crops in that land. One of the interesting things that most people don't realize is across that land is a more than 100-year-old drainage system that has been built underground. Some of it with clay tiles back in the early part of the late 1800s, early 1900s, put in clay tiles. These tile systems run for miles across properties. You can only see them when you're driving down a country road and you see water coming out of an entrance, a tube, into the ditch alongside the road. What it's doing is draining the excess water, which Oregon seems to have an abundance of if you're outside, and you'll see it later today. It drains the fields, allows the farmers to go in and put in their crops. They don't need irrigation. The land is so powerfully fertile, they can just grow the crops with a proper maintenance, proper drainage. Next slide, please. In 2009, that's when I was asked to help put together the Save Helvetia organization. And that battle that they were trying to fight, which they realized they needed a more sophisticated organization, was basically an abuse of the land use system, the procedures and policies by the county of Washington and the city of Hillsborough. They were attempting to take 15,000 acres of the most prime farmland, and the members of that group working together had been told by the city of Hillsborough they're going to put in warehouses across all that land. Not houses, warehouses across all that land. So the citizens banded together under the Save Helvetia organization, and these are just citizens. We're talking farmers, residents. Some of the residents, longtime people have been there, and news people that were working in high-tech region that lived out there that said, this doesn't sound right. It's not working. They're not following the rules. Save Helvetia put together those people, explained to them how to make the process work, and got them in for testimonies in the local towns and at Metro and in Portland. It was a multiple year-long fight, but it was being rammed through this illegal process, which was an abuse of the land use laws. And in that process, Save Helvetia began to work with Thousand Friends, because we found out Thousand Friends of Oregon had a lot of information. They had a lot of knowledge, and they had a lot of lobbying expertise, which frankly Save Helvetia didn't have. They just had people who cared. So that proved to be a very powerful and mutually beneficial partnership. They fought together in wide-ranging groups, but the law just kept being pushed, not the law, but the land use findings were rammed through. At the end, Save Helvetia joined with others and Thousand Friends of Oregon and filed a lawsuit against Washington County. They said, you didn't follow the rule. I mean, Save Helvetia is a very fundamental organization. It's basically, think of it as a law enforcement group. Because really, we were just looking at the law saying, this is what it requires. You didn't follow the steps. The battle went all the way to the Oregon Court of Appeals, and we won. Well, next slide, please. The shock to the system was extensive. Due to the significant economic disruptions involved, that's when the legislatures had to step in. Because there literally were probably hundreds of millions of dollars in investments that had been following the land use process. Land had been purchased, things had been put in place, plans, developments, and it was all on hold. And as a result, the state legislature passed what is called, it's famously known as the Grand Bargain. And that process, that law, basically tried to settle the land use disputes. It did save the vast majority of the farmland. Next slide, please. But in the process, a fundamental change occurred in land use policies and the effects here in Oregon. It gave a new open door to individuals and groups seeking a quick fix or bypass of the land use laws, and and how they did that, they're initiating land use bills or bills related to land use now in Salem, not in your local community. This new phase in the land use process has dramatically changed how local communities must operate. No longer can you just deal with your local government officials. You can, but you have to have a very strong connection with what's going on in Salem. And in that process, Save Helvetia now is becoming an affiliate of Thousand Friends. And in doing so, we've gained all that knowledge and expertise which we don't have. We can provide individuals for testimony, but now it's very difficult because in very short notice, you have to get down to Salem. So now lots of written testimony are going down there. But that's the change. And in that process, Save Helvetia is reaching out, trying to keep track of other groups. What is everyone doing? What law is being passed that may be initiated by someone, say, in Ontario, not in Hillsborough, coming out of Hillsborough? Is that law out there going to directly impact the lands? The good news is there are resources. We're now affiliated with Thousand Friends. They give us the early warnings. We then broadcast to our teams to get the testimony in, to get whoever can make it in very short notice to Salem. But again, there's no great reservoir of knowledge or expertise within Save Helvetia. It's just folks like you, no different. Got a caterer, someone that actually not owns the company, actually does the on-site catering. She's great because she goes to meetings and she can hear politicians talking and she just makes mental notes. Oh, that's what they're getting ready to do. But I also have farmers who go out there on their tractors. They don't want to go to public meetings, but they're willing to sit down and write something at night and mail it off. So you need to start thinking about pulling things together. So that's Save Helvetia. Think of it as a defensive organization that works to protect, to try and preserve what's there, and works with a local community, and that's its aspect. And by the way, it is a nonprofit, but is a 501c4, which is more like a political action group. It's allowed to lobby. Has no tax, you can't get tax deductions if you make donations to it, so you have to get people who care, who just care. But you have to have that capability going. So again, I'm not anyone special. I'm just the guy someone asked for help, and then I got pulled in, slowly but steadily, and I get a really nice hat. But I wear several hats. So Save Helvetia is that organization. I have another hat. This is the hat, next slide please, is the Helvetia Community Association. Think of this one as the offensive organization. It doesn't do political action. It is folks who actually like the land. They're trying to protect the land, work with the community, work with the culture of the land. I got pulled in because I knew how to balance checkbooks. And they needed it to be a nonprofit, and guess what I had to do? They said, you did such a great job consulting on the other nonprofit. Could you do this one? And I said, yeah, I'll do this one. Okay. And then they just won't let me leave now because I'm the only one that knows how to file the state paperwork. So, that's just how it works. Nothing fancy. Next slide, please. So this organization deals with the history, the culture, and the environment of our local region, the Helvetia region. That's what we do. The specialty, how we got started, is we put together festivals because we realized we have to reach out to the community, inform them what's going on. What great, better way to start out that is putting together a festival in late summer, bring people in, and have different groups present, do shows, show and tells, sell some of our merchandise. We've got merchandise for sale. You can get the spiffy hat if you go on the website. It's very nice. And so we held it in a barn. Someone has a barn? Yes, I helped clean the barn before it and wiped down all the windows. It's a nice barn. So put together that. Next slide, please. But during this festival, what we're doing is we're explaining to people about the culture of the region. And yes, we did invite the Native Americans to come in because they're the original owners of the land, if you will. They have farmed that land for over 10,000 years. And indeed, they farmed. I didn't realize all the ancient oak trees out there that you see, the big ones, they planted them. Families, Native Americans, families owned tracts of land, in a sense, and grew oak trees because they needed the acorns to help produce the bread. And so the children, as the Native American representative that came to the event explained to me, the children took care of the little nursery area where it had all the little trees. The moms and dads planted the trees once they were ready to come out of the nursery, and the grandparents helped grind the acorns that were harvested. And they did other farming. It just wasn't recognizable because they kind of mixed crops together in very innovative ways. You now read that in the CSAs are starting to look at how you can have companion planting. Well, they already knew about it. The only challenge we had was by the time the settlers came here, disease had wiped out almost the entire population, so we'd lost that connection. The Native Americans know about it, but it's there. So we invited them. And as you can tell, a great hit. They'd put on shows. Next slide, please. But of course, we always did the local settlers. And in our area, the Swiss were settlers. And they would play their tunes. Really, after about 4 of different songs, you can't actually tell the difference. You kind of get the feel. But it's great stuff, They know that. And they play the horns. But what we're really doing is showing people the connections. What's going on? What was going on here? Who lives here? Because you drive through it, it looks beautiful. But it was nothing more than asking, who can do this? a group we heard played the horns. We asked them, could you come in and play the horns? And we did other things. We did pie sales, pie walks, circles on the floor. People walk around. Turned out to be a huge hit because you could win a pie every time you won. So people would do that. But what were we doing? Bringing in the connection. Next slide, please. Every year, by the way, there is a parade in Helvetia. Most people don't realize it. They close the road, Helvetia Road, near the church, the historic Helvetia Church, and basically the kids bring their animals down through, and some of the parents too. Different animals. It's quite an event. I've been there several times. Again, tying people to the culture. What actually happened? What's been going on? What are people doing? And in fact, the Helvetia Community Association, because of our association with this and with the festival, we also do publish historical books by a local author. The Cultural Coalition of Washington County has provided annual funding to our nonprofit because of what we're doing as part of sharing the culture. So we have books on the Native Americans with their approval. A book has been written. We've done books on the Swiss cheese makers. That's out. We're working on another book, The Early Settlers, what's going on. And we actually, there's a book that's almost ready for publication. It was the first African-American family to live in Washington County, was up there. It was actually a well-regarded family. And we're working with the family, descendants, right now getting the final, forwards. They're going to write up a little article about it. They were one of the more famous people to live up there. But again, we're using techniques, different ways of trying to pull people in to explain, why is the land important? What's going on here? I mean, people drive around, they see these little blocks of forest out in the middle of fields and don't think anything about it. What they don't realize is those are Native American burial grounds that the owners know. It's been passed down generation, owner to owner, saying, don't clear that property. Leave it. That is sacred land. So we also put together pamphlets. We have tour pamphlets. People know where to go to see the sites of Helvetia, where the parade's at. Next slide, please. But Save Helvetia has been defending it. Now, Helvetia Community Association, better known as HCA, is now shifting gears to become a conservation organization. We have conservation easements. We have 2. So we're moving up. We've got forest land, which is a wildlife habitat, and we've got agricultural land. But again, we're trying to educate the community on why this is important. Farmers are starting to ask us about it. What's going on? How does this work? We don't have the funding to buy land or pay for easements. We're depending on the owners to say, we think this land is special, we want to preserve it in perpetuity. Again, we had no special expertise, we just launched into it. Someone came to us and said, can you do a conservation easement? We looked at our bylaws. We had written enough in there. It was great. We had a lawyer review it. And he said, well, just add a couple of phrases. We added the phrases. Boom, we're legal. We don't say land trust. We're just Helvetia Community Association. And we put together the easement. I do the land surveys every year. I walk the property. I filled out the form that I got off the Land Trust Association, the national one, and I just fill in the blanks. And I take the pictures. And I talk to the landowner. I mean, there's no great mystery here. It's just a matter of asking yourself, why not? So, in summary, to be effective, we found that in our evolving land use process, you needed to clearly define your defensive goals. Why are you trying to defend the property? How are you defending the property? But you also need to have offensive goals. I want to protect this property forever. I want it to maintain. I want to save the culture, save the environment. What can I do? You need to have those there so you can protect what you believe is unique to your community. And you need to seek out opportunities to partner. You can't do this alone. Oh, actually, you shouldn't do it alone. It's a lot easier if you get someone else to tell you, oh, try this, don't do that. That's not going to work. You know, oh, cool. Save time, make your own mistakes. Don't repeat what everybody else has made. It's just a lot easier. And if the last slide, please. So, I'll end my talk with a quote from Tom McCall, our 30th governor. And he, I think, elegantly defines why each of you are here today. And this is his quote, a quote from him. Heroes are not giant statues framed against a red sky. They are people who say, this is my community, and it's my responsibility to make it better. I thank you.